Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 89th episode of In the Trenches, Kroll's weekly cyber threat intelligence briefing. Today is the 24th of February, and my name is George Glass, an Associate Managing Director in the Cyber Threat Intelligence team. Joining me today from the Threat Intelligence team is Ryan Hicks, Sam Flint, and Sarah Carrigan. As always, we'll be covering the most recent trends that our Threat Intelligence team is witnessing in the trenches. So let's get into the situation report. First up, we've got another clock update. That's KTA080. Once again, updating their data leak site with a new list of redacted victim organizations, likely linked to the Cleo vulnerability exploitation. The list contains company names and follows the current pattern the group has established with releasing redacted names to then later slowly start releasing the actual entity and publish data associated with it. So yes, we continue to track this. It's still ongoing, and as more updates become available, we will be sure to share them with you. Next up, CISA has added PANOS and SonicWall vulnerabilities to the known exploited vulnerability catalog. The two vulnerabilities are CVE 2024-53704, which has a CVSS of 8.2. That's an improper authentication vulnerability within the SonicWall SonicOS authentication mechanism, and CVE 2025-0108 with a CVSS score of 7.8. That's an authentication bypass vulnerability within PANOS web-based management interface. We have reports on these vulnerabilities, and of course, patching should be put as top priority as they're exploited in the wild. Finally, some news from over the weekend here. Attackers have stolen a record 1.46 billion from Bybit, Ethereum cold wallet. On the 21st of February, cryptocurrency exchange Bybit disclosed a theft of more than 1.46 billion worth of cryptocurrency from one of its cold wallets in the largest cryptocurrency hack ever, almost doubling the 620 million stolen from Sky Mavis in March 2022. Forensic analysis has revealed that the attackers utilized phishing techniques and social engineering to gain initial access to the internal credentials. Once inside the system, they exploited vulnerabilities in Bybit's multi-signature authentication process, creating fraudulent approvals to transfer the assets in $27 million increments to over 10 additional wallets. On the 23rd of February, analytics firm Arkham confirmed researcher Zach XBT's analysis of the attack, attributing it to North Korean-linked Lazarus Group, that's KTA071, revealing the commingling of funds from the initial Bybit theft address and BingX and FemX exploits previously attributed to the group. While Bybit have yet to confirm if any of the stolen funds have been recovered, stablecoin Tether announced it had frozen 181,000 USDT linked to the theft. Bybit's CEO has assured customers that all other cold wallets remain secure and the company is solvent, even if the loss is not recovered, as all clients' assets are one-to-one backed. A very interesting development from over the weekend there, and one that we'll certainly be keeping a close eye on and providing additional analysis where we can. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, please get in touch with us using cti@kroll.com. So let's get into the rest of today's briefing. Today, we're going to be covering the following. I'm going to be talking about device code phishing. Ryan is covering FINALDRAFT and PATHLOADER campaigns. Sam will be walking us through a cloud image name confusion attack. And of course, Sarah will be here with the ransomware roundup, with a very interesting ransomware roundup this week. So let's get into the device code phishing. This is something that we've been covering for a couple of years now. It's certainly something that we use in our Purple team and Red threat-led pen test engagements. And this is device code phishing. Recent reports from Velexity and Microsoft highlight a new campaign of device code phishing. According to those reports, the attacks were conducted by a cluster of threat groups that are consistent with Russian state-aligned goals. Those are being tracked as Storm 2372 by Microsoft and UAC 0307 and 0304 by Velexity. We are combining all of those clusters and the recent related activity under an activity cluster called KTAC 008. So device code phishing and device code authentication flows is a very interesting attack path. It's part of the OAuth 2.0 standard, and it's designed so that devices can easily authenticate to a cloud tenant or service. For example, some sort of ICS tooling or IoT device may not have input mechanisms that are adequate for entering long passwords, and so a device code is displayed on the screen, which a user can then use their phone or scan a QR code to authenticate. If you've ever used a smart TV, that's likely how you're logging into your streaming services via a device code authentication. Threat actors have been using this technique for a long period of time. As I mentioned before, we've used them in purple team engagements in the past. Typically, execution of the technique requires social engineering component in order to deceive the user into entering a device code that has been generated by the attacker. And I put a diagram on the screen here, which sort of represents what an attacker must do. So an attacker would reach out to the auth service, request a device code. The device code is sent. The attacker would then build that into a social engineering attack, whereby the code is delivered to the victim and they are tricked to authenticating that particular device or service. And then the attacker will then use that code or the generated access token to further their attacks. Microsoft reported that the activity that they observed used Microsoft Teams lures in order to socially engineer victims into entering the device code, having previously made contact via Signal, WhatsApp, or Teams to build rapport. There's more details of this in the weekly reports, including some of the authentication links that they use and some examples of the social engineering that's being undertaken. Many of it appears to be impersonation of high-profile individuals, and so all of that is sort of conducive with a very sophisticated social engineering campaign. And then once the threat actors have received the authentication, they're using additional authentication methods to enable them to enroll attacker-controlled devices into Entra ID, which allows them to obtain a primary refresh token and collect additional information such as emails, and using the Microsoft Graph APIs to quickly gather information and download files. We'll be keeping a close eye on this as usual. Kroll remains very confident in our ability to detect this particular mechanism, and we've been conducting additional threat hunting for indicators of compromise that are attributed to this campaign as well. So that's it from me. Next up, we go over to Ryan to talk about FINALDRAFT and PATHLOADER. Over to you, Ryan.
Thank you, George. So Elastic Security Labs reported on a campaign from back in November last year that affected South American and Southeast Asian organizations. So just to go through a few highlights here. So there appears to be no confirmed initial access for the campaign. However, the first signs of attack that were noted were certutil being run to download several files from an unknown endpoint, they say, that was on a connected network to the victim. From here, PATHLOADER was observed, and this is a lightweight Windows executable primarily designed to download and execute encrypted shellcode from remote servers. Notable with PATHLOADER is that embedded within its configuration are command and control domains that mimic legitimate security vendors, which is shown in the screenshot in the middle there. In this case, what appears to be mimicking Checkpoint and Fortinet. And upon execution, PATHLOADER also employs API hashing and string obfuscation to kind of hinder any static analysis that could be done, and eventually retrieves and deploys or sort of decrypts shellcode that loads the FINALDRAFT implant. And FINALDRAFT is essentially the shellcode that's delivered by PATHLOADER. It's injected into memory, typically into MS Paint or ConHost, and its focus really is on data exfiltration and further process injection. And notably here for FINALDRAFT is that it abuses the Microsoft Graph API to utilize Outlook's mail drafts for command and control, and creating and managing draft emails to send and receive commands, therefore blending its malicious activities into kind of normal network traffic. The malware's configuration is also embedded and encrypted within its binary, and there are variants of the malware for both Windows and Linux platforms. So recommendations wise, really the use of these kind of legitimate services, particularly blending in with normal traffic, and also those kind of mimicked security vendors in the domains, really highlights the kind of importance of the kind of layered defense, where some kind of traffic or activity may be quite difficult to detect. So really those layers are important, particularly in this campaign, to identify any malicious activity. And that's all for me. I'll hand back to George.
Thank you very much, Ryan. And now, Sam, you're up next to discuss a cloud image name confusion attack. Over to you, sir.
Thanks, George. Security researchers have discovered a name confusion attack that exploits the commands used by software projects to retrieve Amazon machine image IDs. Dubbed whoAMI, the attack allows anyone that publishes an AMI with a specially crafted name to gain code execution within a vulnerable AWS account. A name confusion attack, a subset of a supply chain attack, is where an attacker publishes a malicious resource with the intention of tricking misconfigured software into using the malicious resource rather than the one intended. In this instance, Amazon's virtual machine images. An AMI is the virtual machine image used to boot up an EC2 instance. These can be private, customized, or public AMIs. In many cases, users will already know the AMI ID and will use that when creating an EC2 instance. However, if a user is looking to launch the latest version of an operating system, they may not know the exact ID. In that case, users can utilize AWS's search functionality via the EC2 Describe Images API to find the most recent AMI for the OS and region. Anyone can publish an AMI, but by specifying the owner's attribute when searching public AMIs, results can be limited to only official images. There are 4 accepted values for the attribute: self, to include private AMIs hosted within the current AWS account; an account ID, to include AMIs from a specified AWS account; Amazon, to include AMIs served from a list of around 220 verified accounts; and AWS Marketplace, to include AMIs from Amazon's curated catalog of third-party software. If the owner's attribute is used with any of these values, deployments will not be vulnerable to this attack. Indeed, AWS's Finding an AMI documentation includes a warning on the importance of specifying the owner's attribute. However, the vulnerable pattern was found in a host of private and open source code repositories with public examples of code written in Python, Go, Java, Terraform, Pulumi, and even Bash scripts using AWS CLI, failing to specify the owner, owner alias, or owner ID parameters, making any accounts implementing them vulnerable to this attack. Below is an example of how this could be exploited in a typical block of Terraform code, with the commonly used AWS_AMI data block to find the AMI ID. Below that is the request made by Terraform when executed. The list of AMIs returned that match the expression will include public community AMIs from any AWS account. Since most recent equals true, Terraform sorts the JSON data by date and pulls the AMI ID from the most recently published AMI in the list. As shown in the attack flow on the right, exploiting the pattern is trivial. A malicious actor would simply publish a malicious AMI with a name matching the Ubuntu image and a C2 backdoor pre-installed, and make it public or share it privately with the targeted AWS account. The key conditions making a victim vulnerable to this attack, regardless of the programming language used, is the use of the EC2 Describe Images API call to retrieve the AMI ID, using the name filter, and failing to specify either the owner, owner alias, or owner ID parameters, and retrieving the most recent image from the returned list. Then using that AMI ID to create an EC2 instance, launch template, launch configuration, or any other infrastructure. It's interesting to note that in addition to finding a host of public code that was vulnerable, with Amazon's assistance, the researchers also published 2 AMIs that were exact replicas of the most recent official Amazon AMIs. They detected tens of thousands of successful calls for the images, indicating that internal systems within AWS were also retrieving AMI IDs in an insecure way. AWS issued a GitHub security advisory for this vulnerability, but rejected the submission for a CVE assignment. Following the disclosure, AWS have introduced an account-level guardrail to protect against the possibility of running AMIs from untrusted, unverified accounts. It works by defining an allow list of trusted image providers by specifying account IDs or by using the keywords Amazon, Amazon Marketplace, or AWS Backup Vault. This will only allow AMIs from accounts that match those IDs or keyword definitions. The feature also comes with an audit mode that allows detection of running EC2 instances sourced from AWS accounts other than those you explicitly trust. To mitigate this attack, Kroll recommends that users enforce the discovery and use of only trusted provider AMIs in Amazon EC2 by configuring the allowed AMIs feature within their accounts, as well as auditing existing EC2 instances for this vulnerability. Back to you, George.
Thank you very much, Sam. Really interesting attack scenario there. And lastly, Sarah has some very interesting news. All of my birthdays came at once last week, and we got some very interesting chat logs leaked. Over to you, Sarah.
Yep, no problem, George. So researchers identified leaked chat logs between BLACKBASTA's group members, and these chat logs are spanning between September 18th of 2023 to September 28th of 2024. The leak of these chat logs was first posted on it's a file sharing site called Mega, and that was since removed, and the chat logs are now accessible via Telegram, a certain Telegram channel. The chat logs are in Russian, and they contain over 200,000 messages between members discussing key information, such as like how the group's internal networks work, other threat actors, operations, and relationships within the group. So according to Bleeping Computer, the leaked chats also contain 367 unique Zoom info links, which indicate the likely number of companies targeted during this period. Ransomware gangs commonly use the Zoom info site to share information about a targeted company internally or with victims during negotiations. So the threat actor behind the initial leak is Exploit Whispers. They also shared further information about the ransomware group members, such as the hierarchy within BLACKBASTA and who is involved in the group. So any more information or more in-depth information about this, you can refer to our week's report about any more of the chat logs. That's all from me, George.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Yes, we'll definitely be covering this in more detail in next week's report. So yes, that's all we have time for this week. Thank you very much to Sarah, Ryan, and Sam. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, please do reach out to us using cti@kroll.com. That's cti@kroll.com. Have a wonderful day.